Welcome to the Journal podcast from the Chartered Insurance Institute, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of insurance and beyond. I'm Michael Bond, Social Media and Production Executive at the Chartered Insurance Institute. Today, we'll be talking about events insurance. We'll be discussing what it is, the types of risks that it covers, the individuals and organisations who may take out this type of insurance, as well as applying it to real-world situations. And joining me today, Chris Westwood, Underwriter at Worldwide Special Risks. Thanks for joining me today, Chris.
No problem. No, glad to be here.
Glad to have you on here. So to begin with, for listeners who may not be familiar, could you tell us what events insurance is?
Yeah, certainly. So event insurance is an insurance coverage that allows event organisers, hosts, and businesses to protect themselves financially in the event of something goes wrong with their event. Okay? So that could be event cancellation, liability, so someone being hurt or injured at the event, or even property going missing or damage to property at the event.
Fantastic. And you've already touched on a couple of things there. So within events insurance, it's almost like a broad umbrella, because within that, it sounds like you've got public liability, you mentioned. What other things make up events insurance?
Yeah, so public liability is a key one. So that protects companies if in case someone is hurt or injured at their event. So that's a member of the public attending the event. Also damage to property, so say to the venue, and third-party property as well, so equipment brought. But not the insured's own equipment. So that would need to be protected under what's called property or risks coverage. So that would be if they're hiring in a marquee or maybe some PA equipment that gets damaged. So that's all covered under that. In addition to public liability, we can add employees as well. So a lot of companies will, their employees will be covered for their day-to-day activities, but may not be covered for attending events. And also some event companies will hire temporary staff maybe for events because they need that outside help. So that would be added to that public liability cover to protect those. And then lastly, event cancellation cover. So this is really, really important. It protects the financial input that the client is having on their event. So if the event is cancelled for any reason, beyond their control, of course, they can protect themselves financially, whether that's revenue or their costs and expenses.
Well, fantastic. So there's lots within that then. And you've already touched on some of the types of events, but if we go into that in a bit more detail, if you give us some examples of the types of events, so maybe one that comes to mind maybe is a wedding, but what in addition to that, for example, are the types of risks that you cover or types of events that you cover? Yeah,
so it is a really, really wide-ranging number of events that we cover. Go through the list would take us all day. But it really starts with it can be anything from really small private events that, an individual person is putting on. So weddings, like you mentioned, birthday parties. Then we might have, fundraising events for charities and the like, summer fete, stuff like that. Small business events, so conferences, those kind of things, up to large music festivals and tours by bands and artists as well. So ranging from, policies that might cost £50 or £60 all the way up to ones that would cost, hundreds of thousands. And it really is, a really, really wide range. Triggers for the cancellation cover, do change between those different types of events as well.
Fantastic. And within those different risks within the events, what sorts of different risks are there depending on the event? So let's say you mentioned a concert, for example. What would the major risks be for that, for example, versus say for a wedding?
Yeah, so it's a really, really good question because so when we look at an event, there's kind of three things that we really look at when we first see the inquiry. So what the event is, where the event takes place, and when the event is taking place as well. So start with the what. So what type of event is it? Each type of event has very, very different risk factors relating to it. So a wedding, bride and groom, are they going to be there? Similar to a concert, is the headline artist going to be there? That's really quite key. But if it's, an outdoor event, you've also got to take into account weather. If it's fireworks, it's going to be, is it too windy? Whereas, an indoor event like a small conference, because it's indoors, you're not going to have the same sort of weather implications there potentially, unless it takes place in Florida in storm season. Then you have to take that into consideration. And you've got the where. So indoors, outdoors. does, weather obviously has far more effect on outdoor events, of course. But also other locations you have to consider as well. Something like, a big conference center in the middle of a city is a very, very different location to, say, a hotel on a coastal resort somewhere where there's limited routes in and out of the venue. A city location has better transport links, but also you have to consider cities might be affected more by, say, civil commotion or something like that, because, it's maybe a center of, government or something like that as well. And then the when is, of course, what time of year it is as well. Going back to the outdoor events, something in the summer is more likely to go ahead than potentially something in the winter. So we have to take all those factors into account.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I touched on wedding a couple of times. My brother recently got married, so it made me think at the time whether venues, suppliers, lots of things come into consideration, and the devil's in the detail, I suppose, when looking at these policies. So if I use that as this key example, if I came to you guys and said, I want to insure this wedding, how would I go about that? And what would be the questions that you would ask? And what would be the key factors going into that underwriting assessment that you make?
So wedding insurance is quite a unique product. And it's one that's quite typically packaged. You can basically go to, high street retailers and they should sell a wedding insurance package. We would generally only look at, we generally only more see the sort of larger events that sort of fall outside of those kind of smaller wedding packages. We're talking about high net worth individuals or where they're spending quite a lot of money on putting on an event like that. But yeah, weddings, similar to all the other events that we look at, it's those similar factors, when, where, and who we're covering. The list of the individuals, bride and groom. One thing very important to note that we don't cover the change in their minds at all. So if the bride suddenly gets cold feet and pulls out on the morning of the wedding, that's not going to be covered. So the individuals, the venue, that's the information that we need basically to look at the risk for you.
Okay, so it covers quite a lot there. On the flip side of that then, what are some of the limitations that come with, not just in the wedding, but for concerts and other types of events that you insure? What are the limitations that you put on some of those, or what do you not insure? What's uninsurable potentially?
So there are loads of things that are covered and of course aren't covered. Most of the standard things that general insurance don't cover. So like for war risks, terror, cyber. Of course, some of these things can be bought as well and added on to insurance policies. So we need to be wary of where events are, what's happening in the locale as well, to re-rate and look at that. Certain things aren't covered. So, for example, financial failure of the event. Sorry, the event loses money because it doesn't make enough money. That's a financial failure of the event and not due to the event being cancelled necessarily.
I see. So there are two different parts of that. So you may see it as a cancellation side, but there's actually other parts within there where they go, we don't cover that specifically, and that I assume be detailed quite heavily in the policy wording as well. If in the event of something, say, going wrong, because some of these events people obviously build up to and it's look forward to, lots of money on in concerts. We even seen wireless for a very different reason, of course, but that event being cancelled very recently. If something does go wrong, there's obviously a lot of pressure on the individuals and the stress on the individuals at the time. So when they're going through a claims process, how does that work for the policyholder, and especially during what's going to be a fast-moving, highly stressful situation? How quickly or effectively is that dealt with normally?
We always try as quickly as possible to appoint a loss adjuster onto any claim. We obviously like to be notified as early as possible with any incident. Hopefully before any decision has been made, of course. With that loss adjuster, we will work with the insured as well and try to put into place maybe some measures that can try and continue so the event can continue as best as possible, and just try and work with the insured, with the client, with the loss adjuster to help manage that whole situation. It might just be as simple as advising them what information they need to keep on record for a loss.
So building on that, are there any ways in which you may mitigate risks that may occur close to the event happening?
Yeah, correct. So we will always try and make sure the event proceeds, right? So if it's within our power to bring something in potentially, or to move the event, that kind of thing, we will always try and do so. Like the example of hiring trackway in to lay over a boggy pit, patch of land, chip bark or something like that to dry up any potential wet boggy land as well. That has been done. If 6 months out before the event, the venue burns down, we will obviously work with the insurer to try and find them an alternative. And that's part of the policy as well. It's not just the event is cancelled and the policy pays out. We'll always try and make sure the event does proceed, as it can.
That's really good. Yeah. Sometimes you probably think, and it's probably a misconception for myself as well, that you think it's very binary. It's either it goes ahead or it's cancelled and full payout. There's no in between. There's no what can we do to improve the situation, not just for yourselves and as the insurer, but also for the individual or the company as well who's putting on this event, because that may well help them out far more than just here's your money back basically, or here's the return of the funds. Yeah,
correct. The insurance is not, it's important for the insurer to understand that the insurance is not there just to bail them out. Right, it's not to do that. It is they've got to still proceed and try and get the event on. They've got to do everything within their power to do so. But the insurance is there to help them out. We are going to try and help them. Continue with the event as best as possible. And if that means we spend a little bit of money doing so, absolutely fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So not just a safety net, but problem solving, providing an additional alternate solution for them. That's really, really quite good. I haven't really thought of that. And in addition to that, then, what would you say some of the misconceptions that maybe organisers or potential future policyholders may have with events insurance?
So each section that we've discussed, the liability, the property and the cancellation, does have some limitations and exclusions. One of the key things, and it's quite topical at the moment, is we get asked to cover things that have already occurred. So quite recently, obviously, all the issues that we were having in the Middle East, the amount of calls we had on that Monday morning saying, we've got an event coming up in the UAE. Can we get cover for it? Fortunately, it's a bit too late now because that
pre-existing, I suppose.
Pre-existing, that incident's already occurred. Whereas if they had bought the insurance, at the end of last year or even further back for the event, it's likely would have been covered. So that's quite an interesting one. Another misconception, I think, is that the policies just pay out regardless. Like we mentioned before, it's not there just to bail them out. And they've got to prove the loss, right? They can't just say, the artist didn't turn up. They've got to prove that it's an insurable reason for them not turning up. So like an illness or travel delay or something like that, they've got to prove that that artist was there for that reason. Weather is another interesting one as well, because some people think that it's just, good weather or just not bad weather. We only offer cover for adverse weather. So that's where the weather is effectively too dangerous for the event to be held. Not just a light bit of rain thinking, it's a little bit wet. People aren't going to turn up. We better cancel the event.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, weddings as well strikes me as one of those where you think, there's a bit of rain happening. Can I claim on mine? Just get all the money back for it right now.
Exactly. So it's got to be really, really bad that it does cause that cancellation. And the other thing as well, small events, are just as insurable as big events. We mentioned the wedding again, but, you might be spending 10 grand on a wedding, but that's just as important to you, to the insured, as that £1 million conference or that £20 million concert at Wembley.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, I suppose, what are the most common issues you see when events are maybe underinsured, or as you mentioned already, that they're looking for coverage for something that's essentially pre-existing now, like the Middle East is already a lot of chaos happening in the area at the moment and a lot of uncertainty. What do you say the most common issues that you see in that area?
Yeah, so leaving something to the last minute is a big bugbear for us, and I think for all insurers. I mean, someone coming to you, the week before an event for insurance, for an event that they've been planning for months, maybe even a year in advance, it's a big red flag, isn't it? I mean, like, how unprepared are they? Is there something they don't want us to know that they finally, found out about and they're worried about that's going to cancel the event? It leads us to question maybe their ability to organize an event as well and how well they've done with that. The client also receives less value, right? Like going back to the Middle Eastern example again, if they bought their insurance a year ago, they're covered from the second that insurance binds, it incepts. So an incident like, what's going on there at the minute, potentially be covered. If they leave it to a week before the event, they've only got a week's worth of cover, really. So it's always good for them to purchase early. And again, with something like if they're leaving it to the last minute, are they going to understand what they're buying? I mean, possibly not. If they've left it so late, they don't quite know what it is, I guess. Undershoring is also an interesting one. Again, maybe if it reflects poorly on the organisers as well, maybe they don't understand again what they need, what they're buying, what their actual financial risk is. So again, maybe reflects poorly on them and reduces the likelihood of us being interested in insuring the actual event.
Absolutely. Touched on one of the points you made earlier. It seems quite similar to other types of insurance. There's a lot of transferable ideas there, especially looking at car insurance. You buy that one day to go before your insurance, the policy will be more expensive than if you planned in advance. So there's a lot to be said about that, and doesn't give you guys a whole lot of time to prep insurance policies, especially specific ones where they want, if it's a concert, they need specific insurance for different things. For public liability, you'll need to be how many number of participants and people that are attending the event as well. So there's a lot to consider for you in a very short space of time as well. So that can obviously factor into some of the decisions and the stress for you guys as well.
Yeah, correct. Public liability insurance, we haven't actually spoken about it that much, but you brought that up. So yeah, something like, a small private event, you're not going to need too much risk information. Whereas if you've got 50,000 people turning up to see, an artist in a park, you want real in-depth information about safety, about risk, risk assessment, security, all that kind of information. And if you're getting that a day before, it doesn't give you a lot of time to, read and digest that information and rate it correctly.
Absolutely. And within that as well, just coming to my mind, if information is provided that's not as accurate, say they're supposed to have 50,000 people turn up and then either, worst case scenario, 70,000 people turn up to a park event and they oversold the event, is that something that has to be considered as well? And can that potential things like that make a policy null and void or affect their actual coverage that they get?
It could potentially, yes, because the information that we provided at inception or proposal stage is incorrect. So it could lead to issues further down the line, yes.
I see. It makes a lot of sense. And I suppose looking forward now, or slightly back but ahead of time, events have changed over the years, and especially since COVID as well. We've started to see more digital events. We've seen sort of an emerging risks in different areas now that we didn't have before. Cyber threats around maybe ticketing. We've got extreme weather unpredictability as climate change takes place and things like that. So we're seeing more volatility and I suppose more uncertainty in that area and different markets. What would you say are some of the major new risks that you're seeing, and how are you responding to that or having to respond to that?
So adverse weather and the changing climate is, it always has been and it always will be an issue going forward. It's always a challenge and always something we need to take into account when we are looking at events. When and where, times a year, all those kind of factors taking place. Recently, you may have seen a very good example in the US and Canada. I believe it was the year before last, the wildfires. I personally, in all the years I've done this, never seen anything like that. It was crazy. The amount of events that were affected by not just the fires themselves, but the smoke and this toxic smoke that was pouring across parts of North America. We've really got to consider and think about those things going forward. And the other thing, the main thing, particularly at the moment, is the geopolitical situation. Currently in the Middle East, but we've seen it in Ukraine. There's been incidents in Western Europe as well with demonstrations and strikes and civil commotion, stuff like that going on recently. It does continue to create issues for events, and not just events within that city or that area itself. Things like in we go back to the UAE again, but UAE is a massive transport hub. Both Dubai and Abu Dhabi are massive transport hubs for flights to traveling to the Far East and other places. And that has a knock-on effect for events as well. People maybe can't get to those events. The F1, for example, I mean, they cancelled an event in Bahrain, but not only that, they had issues moving their cars and equipment out to Australia because it was going to be routed via those locations.
It's really interesting. And we've obviously had wars in the past and conflicts in different, like Ukraine, last few years, Middle East is much more recent. Even though there is probably historical data to help support your underwriting with that, it still must be quite difficult to insure something that's very unpredictable, that happens all of a sudden. It's very quick. It's very, you can't almost put a lot in place or have too much safety nets. And it shows the importance of having insurance in place to deal with things the unexpected, basically, that happen so quickly.
Yeah, correct. You never know everything that's going to happen. And there may be incidents now that you're never going to know everything that's going to happen in the future. So the insurance is there to protect against the unforeseen circumstances. That's what we're here for.
Absolutely. And it's really fascinating area of insurance as well, events, and it seems to cover lots of different things. On a more personal note, what do you enjoy the most about working within the events insurance space?
I mean, like most people in this industry, it was never my intention when I left school to go into insurance. It is the types of events that we see. I mean, most people ask you, what do? You tell them insurance. They think, boring. Well, you say, well, actually, yeah, but I was just, looking at this tour for this A-list, musician. Wow. Okay. And that's really good.
Exactly that, though. It's I think you're right. When people look at it as a sort of a plain look at it, it seems, insurance, that seems quite dull, it doesn't give you anything more. But when you explain in the details where it covers all those different events and you're dealing with things that really mean something to individuals as well, like their favorite artists potentially, or they're getting married soon, and suddenly you'll be the one protecting them with their coverage, it suddenly becomes far more fascinating, far more in depth than just a plain line of we work in insurance. I suppose building on that, and the last point I'll make just to bring this nicely to a close is, would you recommend this area to either people who are currently in the insurance profession in different areas, as well as to people looking maybe for a future career somewhere, as in events insurance being a place to go?
Yeah, I really enjoy it. It is a real interesting market. We see lots of different types of risks, and we spoke about the different types of events, and you're always learning as well. And I think it is a good pathway. Yeah,
fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's really interesting talking about this area of insurance, something that we don't normally get a lot of coverage of, but it's good to highlight it, and hopefully we can get more people involved in this area of insurance. So thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Journal Podcast. You can find useful links in the show notes and related articles on the Journal website, along with further podcasts. Please, as always, like, review, and subscribe. And until next time, goodbye.